Well, happy Wednesday, brothers and sisters. Again, thank you for being with me for today's devotion. And would you please, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching the video, let other people know about it, spread the word, share it on Facebook, talk it up with people at work, and invite them to join us in this Bible reading plan and daily devotions. Today, we are in chapter 14 of Proverbs, and you'll remember that Proverbs, most of them take two statements that are generally true, and by contrasting them, make a point, teach us a principle that we can live by. It's not always a hard and fast rule, but it's a general truth that wisdom says you need to pay attention to. And in chapter 14, there are two of them that spoke to my heart when I was reading it. One has to do with how we treat poor people. In chapter 14, verse 21, he says, and this is really straightforward, he who despises his neighbor sins, but happy is he who is gracious to the poor. Happy is he who is gracious to the poor. How we treat people who are in bad circumstances, hard circumstances matters. He repeats something similar down in verse 31 when he says, he who oppresses the poor taunts his maker, but he who is gracious to the needy honors him. In other words, the person who doesn't care about poor people, who makes fun of poor people, who blames them and points finger and taunts them, is actually pointing fingers at God and taunting God and insulting God. Wow. But the person who is gracious to the poor is being gracious to God. He honors God. So just something I need to be reminded of sometimes, and I would imagine there are others of you listening to me, especially here in prosperous America, who need to be reminded of that as well. The second thing that spoke to me in this chapter has to do with what I call self-awareness and growth, personal growth, spiritual growth, self-awareness and growth in wisdom. Because the truth is, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. In chapter 14, verse 1, he says, the wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands. Now, you're thinking about family, and that's true, but the principle that the wise person builds up their house, their family, their life, whereas the foolish person tears it down, applies in so many ways, because the truth is, as I said, sometimes we are our own worst enemy. Rather than making our lives better, sometimes we make our own lives worse and then want to blame everybody else for it, when it's really nobody's fault but our own, because we're not self-aware and we're not willing to learn and grow and become more self-aware. Look at what he says in verse 6. He said, a scoffer seeks wisdom and finds none, but knowledge is easy to the one who has understanding. In other words, the person who has a degree of self-awareness and wants to be more self-aware, they're always learning, and it comes easy. But the person who doesn't, who's not self-aware, and they're not willing to do the hard work of becoming self-aware, no matter how hard they work at trying to learn something new, they're not going to grow very much because they're just unwilling to be self-aware. Just doesn't work. Verse 7, he said, leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. It's like we saw in a different verse on a different subject yesterday. Who you hang out with matters, okay? And we need to be around people who help us grow, who help us realize things about ourselves so we can become a better us, who promote self-awareness. Look at verse 8. He said, the wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way, but the foolishness of fools is deceit. A fool will lie to himself and everybody else because he doesn't want to look in the mirror and be honest with what's really there. But the wise person, verse 8, the very first part of the verse, the wisdom of the sensible, the prudent, is to understand, to give thought to his way. A wise person wants to know himself better, know herself better, wants to be self-aware and realize, yes, I'm good at that, but man, I struggle with this. I'm bad at that. This is a strength of mine, but I'm a jerk over here. Self-awareness, so very, very important. The truth is we all have blind spots. We all have areas where we need to become more self-aware and learn and grow. And if we're willing, it'll happen. And there are two things that help us the most. One is God's Word, reading the Bible. Reading the Bible. That's why I'm so excited about our Bible reading plan here at First Baptist Church. So excited about our D group. So excited about these devotions, getting in the Word. A second one is being in community, in relationships. That's why you need to be in a life group. You need to be in a D group. You need to be in community with other believers, because it's in the context of relationships we learn about ourselves. And what's going to happen is either you're going to become self-aware and grow, or you're just going to run off and find another group when that one starts pointing out things. It's just a matter of, if you want to be self-aware and grow, you will. If you don't, you won't. It's a lifelong journey, brothers and sisters. It's a lifelong journey. And you know what? It's worth the journey. The destination is worth the journey. Hey, God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.